I'm certainly going to have some resilience in this studio now because, of course, I've got Benedict Spence here. On the left, Benedict Spence. Not often you say that. And on the right, Jonathan Liss. Political commentators, both of you. Hello.
Hello. Should we swap roles?
No, I don't want you to swap roles, thank you.
And Jonathan can be, slightly to the right of Pinochet.
I'm normally on the right. It's my right. I'm normally on this side of the
Yes, because then you're on the left when we come on. But it's okay. We could do it this way around today. Well, that was amazing, wasn't it, though? We do have a younger generation today who don't have the resilience that adversity brings, and that adversity not being around so much is a good thing, but we do have far worse mental health outcomes as a result of that, right?
I think you have to look at the fact that younger generations are not all being sent off to war or having to work down coal mines or anything like that and say that is a very good thing. I think a lot of things are changing very quickly, certainly in relation to things like technology and the use of technology, for which I wouldn't just say actually young people, I think just society in general is perhaps not quite equipped for, because I think the change of pace is happening so much so that it's very difficult for people to catch up, and I think that's reflected in the fact that we have so many more people coming down with mental health conditions or finding themselves fatigued or with burnout. Actually the changing pace of society is a very different kind of stress or trauma, if you like, to what people would have had to go through in the past. And I think because it's a very different sort of thing, it's presenting itself in very different ways. And I think that that's sort of reflected in the fact that actually you're much more likely today to find yourself depressed than suffering with shell shock. Probably a net positive.
Do you think that's a fair comment, though, that the lack of resilience that has come from, that we seem to have today to mental health problems, has come from the good thing, which is a lack of the real adversity, like having to go to war, like, this poor lady who went through a tsunami, she said to herself, she said, I used to be really depressed, I used to have all of these lots of issues, and I learned that I had to rewire my brain, and this it saved my life, kind of thing.
Look, I mean, if anyone has like a major event in their lives, it often recalibrates and puts things into perspective. If you have a major illness, if you have a bereavement, I mean, those aren't things that have sort of declined in the last few years. I mean, obviously, maybe serious illnesses in younger people, but people still get cancer. People get ill. People die. That's not stopping anytime soon. And so, major difficult things will always happen in people's lives, no matter what the geopolitical context of war is. But I think a really important thing that you're missing, Cristo, which no generation in recent history ever had to contend with, was being locked in our homes for 2 years. And the people that you're talking about, young people, are the people who suffered far more than anyone at this table, because these are people who had basically 2 of the most important years of their lives taken from them. It's people in the most... I can't imagine being at university, for example, while this is going on, while you're making the friends you're meant to be making for life, while you're learning the key skills about sort of debating with people, or being at school, at any stage in school, whether it's early years or primary school, or when you're about to do your A-levels. An entire generation of children and young people is going to have their lives completely remoulded by that seismic event. And when you talk about resilience, I kind of think we just need to be a little bit more generous to ourselves as well, because we all went through that in different ways. There's no one who emerged from that completely unchanged. And so there are always going to be difficult things that happen. Just because we're not sending people to war, thank God, doesn't mean that life can't be very, very difficult. And just a slightly less serious issue, I suppose, but still serious. For example, when I was at school, I often had quite a difficult time at school, but when I sort of think about that, from a period of, so how many years afterwards, I think, thank God that there wasn't social media when I was at school. Because I think about kids who are now growing up and have to live their lives, often very, very difficult time of their lives, in school, and then that doesn't end at the school gates, because now they have the internet 24 hours a day. Social media, if someone's being bullied, for example, that is now a 24-hour event. And so I think that young people do have stresses that we could never have imagined while we were growing up.
I would never allow a young person.
That's why I'm saying it's going at a faster pace than we can necessarily keep up with, because things like social media, actually, how do you sort of step in and stop that? So it's something that is...
You don't give your children a smartphone.
Well, that's the solution.
The rabbit's out of the hat now. The Pandora's box has been opened.
I had children.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you. My children, if I had children, wouldn't have access to a smartphone. But a lot of people, as Jonathan says, they already do. And that it's a generation of people who, even if the subsequent generation decides, OK, they're not going to have smartphones, that generation has still been affected. And we've yet to see what the long-term effects of that are. And again, with early-stage children who, didn't go to nursery or anything like that and had their development delayed as a result of the pandemic, there is this sort of 15-year sort of cohort of people who we don't actually know what the knock-on effects of that's going to be.
And the other thing is that, the other thing is about smartphones, where people are talking about sort of banning under 13s. And what about 14 and 15-year-olds? You're saying they didn't get bullied? This is, young people have they have stresses. They're different stresses from the ones that we might have had, and they're certainly different from the ones that our great-grandparents have had, but they are still stresses.
OK, let's talk about, I love this story of the number of quangos. We might talk about the eco group as well that are calling in, flying in all of these T-shirts. But, OK, from pagans to pansexuals, woke dates celebrated by the civil service, Gender Fluid Visibility Week, Transgender Parent Day, Stress Awareness Month, Pansexual Visibility Day, Forestry Commission, which manages publicly owned woodland, published a diversity and inclusion calendar for the civil service. This was for Latinx Heritage Month, a gender-neutral term for people with a South American background. Rastafarian divinity Haile Selassie. Oh, yes, of course, that's the Haile Selassie. Men's Health Awareness Month, Islamophobia Awareness Month, Disability History Month, as well as World Braille Day, International Mother Language Day, Pansexual Visibility Day, and a few others as well. Oh, Intergenerational Week as well. I mean, this is all a load of old nonsense, isn't it, Jonathan?
I don't think that it's a load of nonsense per se. I think that if people were being compelled to mark these events, if there was, some kind of a departmental gathering for each one of these events, and it was actually sort of costing time, resources, then you could argue about that.
Displays. There are a lot of displays in receptions.
If it's literally just something on a calendar that people can have access to if they want to, if it's just like a poster up somewhere that might mean something to someone in that building that you might not know about, then I honestly can't see the harm. If it is proving an actual distraction to the work of the department, of whatever it is, then we can have a conversation about it. I've not seen any evidence that's the case.
Well, none of them are at work because they're all working from home.
Well, that's not true for a start. But honestly,
it's just in the civil service and has been told he only needs to go in 1 day a week. Seriously?
Well, I think a lot of people have demonstrated over the last few years they can work extremely efficiently from home, and I think that should be expanded to make flexible working hours.
Why are we paying for loads of these massive office blocks then, and all of these displays in these office blocks?
Well, that's a separate issue. You could argue that actually since the pandemic that we don't need all those office blocks actually, and that could be
You're a little pandemic patty today, aren't you?
Well, I mean, it's quite an important thing that happened, Cristo. We've kind of had a collective amnesia about it, but it was actually quite a seismic event.
All right. What about these quangos then? Great British Energy, Border Security Command, Mission Control, Child Poverty Task Force, Independent Football Regulator, New Homes Accelerator, Great British Railways, Coalition to Tackle Knife Crime, Labour Market Advisory Board, the National Energy System Operator, New Towns Task Force, Windsor Framework Independent Monitoring Panel, Solar Task Force, Regulatory Innovation Task Force, the Fair Work Agency, the Office of Trade Sanctions Implementation. I haven't even finished the list. These are all nonsense as well, aren't they?
Well, what a silly thing to say. I mean, obviously some of them will be useful, some of them may be less useful. I mean,
the Defence Industrial Joint Council, the Global Clean Power Alliance.
You could go through all of them and make a case for why that particular task force should be necessary. I'm sure that is what happened before each one. Now, the government obviously came in and had a lot of different priorities, and as with any government, it needs people who are experts in that field to help deliver its goals. And so that it sets up a body that is ultimately supervised by the government, but will also have people who are separate from the government in it. That is how government works. Now, are they all completely useful? I don't know. I'm not in that building sort of bean counting, but I think it's useful
found the 22 billion.
The government came.
They found the 22 billion. It's here.
Do you want to take over, Benedict?
No, I'm enjoying this. I've been here since whatever time. I've already been through this with him. This is your turn.
You two chat for a bit.
I don't want to. I've had to chat. He's been making fun of me for the last couple of hours.
Finish your point. So these are all necessary.
No, I didn't.
Some of them are necessary, some of them might not be.
As I'm just saying, look, what I object to, Cristo, is the kind of knee-jerk, right-wing response that, oh, look at all this, look at all these clangers, look at all this government doing all these bad things. And I just find it so kind of anodyne and banal. Like this, why we have to go through these line by lines. You think requires expertise to decide what is useful, what isn't. Are the people in there doing a good job? Maybe the answer is yes, and maybe the answer is no. I don't know. What I object to is kind of having a wholesale objection to this policy platform. The government was elected on a specific platform. It needed people who are experts in the field to help implement that agenda. So you could argue about the way it's gone about that, but I think that it needs a level of expertise that none of us has in this room to be able to comment on that properly.
So there we go. The government doesn't have expertise itself. It needs to hire the expertise at the cost of religion. Jonathan has just said that government has no expertise.
I didn't say that.
That's his point.
I didn't say that. It requires people who have specific expertise in those policy areas to help implement the government's agenda. I'm not saying that ministers not all ministers are going to sort of have PhDs in the fields that they supervise.
I disagree with all of that, actually, and the point I made before you came in. I'm sort of throwing little grenades at you, Jonathan, as
really,
you know.
That's someone like you.
But I think that some of these will be necessary without a shadow of a doubt. It's the extent of them that I think people will be objecting to. I mean, is that a fair analysis, or do you say get rid of them all?
Well, we discussed this earlier when I was saying that actually one of the major obstacles that the government is already saying that it's encountering is just the sheer scale of the machine when it comes to government bureaucracy. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to have little bodies that are perhaps focused on how to avoid the obstacles that are put in the government's way. But actually, I don't think that Keir Starmer is necessarily the person who will look at these and think, yes, this is a good opportunity to cut regulation, to, downsize this department so that I can get things done. He seems to be far too proceduralist. He seems to take far too long to get anything done. And I think the problem that he will run into is that he will continue to outsource a lot of the decision-making or the advisory roles outside of out of the government to independent experts, to special interest groups, and that will simply contribute to the bogging down of government. These things are often set up with the best intentions. That doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome is good. And I think that, the very fact that we're hearing coming from Number 10 insiders from Number 10 saying Dominic Cummings might have had a point about the sheer scale of the bureaucracy of this country and how that is stopping us from doing anything, I still think that that has to be the priority. And I say that, be you a Labour supporter or a Conservative, you're not going to get the things done that you want to get done by adding more layers to that. You need to get rid of as much of that as you can to push forward your agenda. And that, Labour, we were talking about what it was that Labour were elected on. They were going to get the economy under control. They talked about stopping the budget. But things like house building, they pledged to build an awful lot of housing. You're not going to do that by setting up quangos. You're going to do that by trimming the power of the state.
All right. On that subject, just very quickly before we go to the break, I do want to talk about Boxing Day shopping down 10%. I mean, consumer confidence has never been worse. The CBI a couple of days ago,
Never been worse.
It's okay. It's never been worse since then. Before the pandemic, the figures are worse, as bad as since before the pandemic. Basically, the CBI called it a triple threat that we're heading into recession just a few days ago. Growth has completely flatlined since the new government came in, and yesterday it was revealed that Boxing Day shopping is down 10%. This is all the government's fault, isn't it? For talking down the economy, for having the 3 months of this vacuum where they said that everything was absolutely dreadful, and everything that they've implemented has not led to any growth. Quite the opposite. The economy is flatlining, and this is equating to people not wanting to buy things on Boxing Day sales.
Were you expecting a machine that had basically ground to a halt over several years to suddenly sort of take on wings and sort of soar into...
They inherited a growing economy and falling inflation.
Can you do me a favour? Come on. The economy has been stagnating for years and years and years. Under which government, may I remind you? Your beloved Conservative government, Cristo. So it's not possible, as I said to you the other day on the phone, it's not possible to turn it around in 6 months or a year. We can have this conversation in a few years where the government has made all kinds of decisions, a lot of which I will disagree disagree with, by the way, and I say to you repeatedly that if I was Chancellor, I would make different decisions and I would put the burden on different parts of the economy. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a complete failure. It doesn't mean that all of it's going to be a success.
So it's not their fault
if the government had a silver bullet to fire the economy, any government would fire it. But any decision has trade-offs.
So whose fault is it?
There are all kinds of factors.
That Boxing Day shopping is down 10%.
That people now do their deals earlier, Black Friday, for example, or that people are still feeling sort of a pinch in their pockets from the cost of living crisis. No one's saying the economy is doing fantastically, far from it. But there are lots of different factors. I don't think that national insurance is the reason that people are thinking, oh, you know what, maybe I won't go into town on Boxing Day this year to get my goods. I just don't buy it, I'm sorry.
A lot of you are objecting. Jonathan, I've got to bring this up with you, and then Benedict will get your answer on whose fault is it that no one's shopping at the moment. But Jonathan, a lot of people are very angry with you for comparing the COVID lockdown being traumatic to people to the people who were in the trenches during the war and the adversity that they went.
Did they actually listen to what I said? Did they actually
I can't listen to that imbecile saying COVID was more serious to health than any other situation.
Who's the imbecile? I literally didn't say it.
Does your guest really think that 2 years being mollycoddled by the government is comparable to 5 years at war or 4 years in the trenches? And Andy has just simply said, can we please, when it came to responding to those days or weeks about like people with different diversities or anything else, can we please have a take a break from list day as well? So what was your response to those people who think you've...
Thank you so much. Thank you for reading out those comments.
Well, I'm giving you the chance to respond.
Take a break from this day. What a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, most people do, to be honest. I mean, sort of, yeah,
I would never want that day. I would like to have a let's have Jonathan List every day.
I don't get that from you.
No, you don't.
No, I don't. That's all right, fine. I'm not wanted. All right.
You know, because we disagree on other things, I'm trying to be especially nice.
What do you want me to say, Cristo?
No, I want you to respond to those people who
Please
are...
say that,
Did you say that their viewers are idiots?
Some of your viewers are, I'm sorry, but
well,
I mean, obviously some people are in the country.
In a conversation about the adversity that...
I'm going to go home afterwards, rewatch this and go, hang on a minute, he's talking about me. I feel rather upset about this.
Please don't call our viewers idiots.
So I said,
let me just say why they're saying it. In a conversation about
I said some people, maybe.
In the conversation that we had about the adversity that was faced by older generations and the wars, you brought up the COVID lockdown.
That unlike someone like Lee Anderson, who says that men have to go through the Battle of the Somme, I never said that COVID was comparable to the First World War, Cristo.
No, but
I never said that.
I said
the young people have had different stresses from other people in previous generations. People in the First World War, yes, they had a lot of things going on. They didn't have the pubs closed down. So I'm not saying it was better in those days.
So that was quite. I would say that the First World War is more stressful.
Yes,
than
I agree with you. I'm saying that people have different stresses. They're obviously in the round far, far less than what people once had to go through many years ago. Obviously, I'm not a complete idiot.
See, aren't you glad I've given you the chance to clarify that?
People did have different things happen in their lives which were very damaging to their development, and we have to be generous to that. I'm not saying that young people had to go through the Somme. And by the way, every single person contacting you right now, they didn't go through the Somme either. In fact, the 99.9% didn't even go through the Blitz. And what really annoys me is the boomer generations who talk about our generations as, yo, you don't know hardship. Neither do you, actually. You've had it better than we have, because you actually get a house at £20,000 or £15,000 age 25, and no one of our generation is able to do that. You had jobs for life, you had a great life, and you completely exploited our generations. That's what I say to the boomers.
Mick says older generations were stronger as they had to fight and work for everything, whilst today we give it to them on a plate.
Where were they fighting?
Those boomers had it on a plate.
Where were they fighting?
Those boomers had everything given to them on a plate. Our generations had nothing.
It's the weak generation.
We've had non-stop damage since 2008. The people in their 50s and 60s say, oh, you should stop drinking your lattes. Well, you've had it better than any generation before or since, and that really annoys me.
I was going to say,
sorry for being annoyed, but that really does annoy me.
The generation now that talks about the younger generations being weak because they didn't have to fight anything, let's think about the conflicts that they might have fought in if they were in the army. Oh, okay. The uprising in Kenya, which didn't end particularly well for us. Suez crisis didn't end particularly well for us.
Rates.
Oh, actually, there's rather a lot of conflicts that didn't end particularly well for us. So, you know, if we're going to be talking about, you know, standing up, fighting for your country, it's probably not the best track record, if we're being honest.
As pointed out, not every single piece of adversity needs to be a war. They had very, very high interest rates. They didn't have, you know, those the consumer things that we have nowadays. All the mod cons in the kitchen. They used to have to go outside to the toilet. They used to have to go down coal mines. They didn't have any of those.
The people that we are talking about right now, in their 50s and 60s, did not have to go outside. Did not have to go outside the toilet. Did not go down coal mines. This is like an idea that we kind of like have had frozen for the last 40 years. They think people in their 60s had it hard. No, they didn't. They really didn't.
Tell that to someone in their 60s.
I will.
To be fair, my pandemic was a bit like the Second World War. I stood behind my front door with my shotgun, shouting about how the fascists were coming for me. I had a difficult lockdown, trust me.
OK, is it... we're running out of time, so is it Labour's fault that no one's shopping on the high street for Boxing Day and that it's down 10% after the disastrous tax raid from Rachel Reeves, the lies about the £22 billion, the national insurance rise, which was not in the manifesto, and the consumer confidence being eroded by constant negativity and talking down Britain?
Yeah, why not? I'm not going to disagree with that. You're really invested in that. One thing I would say is I'd agree and disagree with Jonathan in terms of talking about stagnation, because I'd agree that it is not entirely Labour's fault. But I wouldn't know. No, come on. I wouldn't even use the word stagnation, and we should stop lying about this. This country has been in recession for a very long time, and successive governments have massaged figures, and they do that partly with, you know, one of the hot topics of the day, which is mass migration. They massage the figures to give the impression that 0.1% growth is real growth. It's not, and you can feel the effects throughout this country of one being in recession. The fact that there are suppressed wages, the fact that people are, you know, huge numbers of people are on in-work benefits, let alone out-of-work benefits. What I would say is I don't think that Rachel Reeves' budget has at all helped the situation. I think it is a little bit too early to lay all the blame at her feet, but here is my very confident prediction, which is that in 4 or 5 years' time, the situation will be worse. Because actually I think a lot of the measures that she's put in place and the priorities she's taken are completely the wrong ones. But Happy New Year to everybody.
I'm just reading another taste of some of the messages that we've got in.
Oh dear. We might want to duck.
No, Emma says, Jonathan, you are right. Common sense all the way.
Who says that?
Emma.
Oh, thanks, Emma.
So, you know, that's nice, but... Oh dear, someone get Jonathan some Feminax, says Anna in Surrey.
What's that supposed to
I don't know.
I think it's a tablet for...
Is that meant to be some kind of homophobic?
No, I don't think it's supposed to be homophobic. I don't think it's homophobic. It's Anna who sent it in Surrey. I don't think it's homophobic.
Is it like saying feminine? I mean, it sounds like it's got the femin in it.
Is it for hysterics? Is that
it's for hysterics? Yes, I think that's what it's supposed to be for. I think is the.
Why can't I have some?
Well, there's an argument to say you probably need it more.
Thank you.
At times.
I want some special things as well.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about this particular story. I love this story. This is Just Stop Oil. Did I give it to you? I think you got it. Just Stop Oil. They ship their T-shirts from 4,000 miles away. Now, this was similar to the story when I exposed one of the founders of Just Stop Oil, who was driving a diesel still to take her children to school and after-school clubs in, I think, the Cotswolds, where she lived. The eco-warriors, notorious for disrupting traffic, bring in merchandise that is imported from 4,000 miles away in the Dominican Republic. Senior Tory Sir Ian Duncan Smith said that Just Stop Oil was demonstrating its do what I say, not as I do attitude. I mean, Just Stop Oil, they are hypocrites and they are a blight on society, aren't they?
I mean, look, if I was doing Just Stop Oil's PR, which is not a job I would ever do, but if I was, I would say, do you think that maybe you should source those T-shirts from such absolutely watertight ethical places that no one could ever dream of putting you on the front page of the Express to complain about this? That's the first thing I would say to them.
So they're not very bright, are they?
I just think, look, I don't think that Just Stop Oil has done some important things because they get people to talk about just stopping oil and they get people to talk about climate change more generally, which I think is a good thing. And no protest movement has ever sort of proceeded without disruption or without opponents. A lot of, we talk about the suffragettes all the time and all that stuff. People hated them, they complained about them, and they said said he should do this through peaceful or non-violent means, etc., and so without disrupting anyone's life. And the fact of life is that when you want to change things, you do sometimes need to disrupt things as well. Do I like the organisation? No. Do I think they've made mistake after mistake? Absolutely.
OK, well, they're a bunch of hypocrites, but Jonathan overwhelmingly supports them.
No,
I'm joking. I'm only pulling your leg at Christmas, Jonathan.
Oh, well, I mean, you know what I think about Just Stop Oil. I think that they're half-wits. I think that if they weren't half-wits,
this is
they'd
half-wit
probably...
behaviour, right?
Yeah, of course it is. And if they weren't, they'd probably be working at a slightly more effective organisation, working for the aims that they want. I don't think that they are particularly effective. I think that there are far more successful organisations that work to affect government policy when it comes to things like energy production. I think that these people are deeply self-indulgent, and I think that actually Jonathan's right. The very fact that nobody thought this through is a sign, frankly, that they just believe that whatever they do will end up going the way that they want it to.
They've called the UK authoritarian because 20 of Just Stop Oil spent Christmas Day in prison.
Well, they shouldn't have been. And there was an outrageous thing that a 77-year-old woman was returned to jail because they couldn't get a tag to fit around her wrist, and so she had to spend Christmas in jail. And she was on bail. She was returned on early release. She was on early release.
Could have imported.
Look, I think that even you can have all kinds of complaints about Just Stop Oil. It is wrong to put people in jail for years for disrupting a road. I'm sorry.
Well, I think if you've been warned many times, maybe.
It's completely outrageous.
On that note, we must end it, and that's it for you as well, Benedict.
Good night from me.
It's good night from me.
It's like the two Ronnies. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? I don't know which one's Ronnie Barker. You're clearly Ronnie Corbett, actually, aren't you?
Nice.
But Ronnie Barker, he was very talented. That's another Christmas compliment I've given you, Jonathan.
I think you'd be a good Ronnie Barker, actually.
Thank you very much. I'll take that. He was very, very talented
He was very talented.